to Sci-Fi Quantum Archives. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and explore. It started without warning. No alarms. No broadcasts. No front lines. Just silence. One night, a diplomat in New London went to sleep and never woke up. His security team found him in bed, eyes wide open, frozen in a moment of terror. No signs of struggle. No toxins in his blood. His mind had simply stopped. Hours later, a military strategist in Tokyo collapsed over his desk, mid-sentence, in a classified transmission. His pulse was steady, his body unharmed. But when medics pried open his eyelids, they found nothing behind them. A void where consciousness used to be. Then, a senator in Washington, a general in Beijing, a physicist in Berlin. One by one, the architects of global power vanished overnight. Governments scrambled. Officials disappeared behind locked doors. Theories ran wild. Some whispered of a bioweapon. Others swore it was mass psychosis. The truth was worse. By the end of the week, an entire battalion stationed in Antarctica failed to report in. Drone surveillance found them still in their bunks, bodies undisturbed. The footage showed something more unsettling. They had all fallen asleep at the exact same second. Panic spread. Security forces were ordered to stay awake in shifts. Stimulants were distributed like rations. But no drug, no caffeine, no frantic attempt to stave off exhaustion could stop what came next. Across the world, heads slumped forward. Hands went limp. Soldiers, scientists, leaders. Whole networks of command gone in their sleep. And the ones who survived, they didn't last long. They woke up screaming, ripping at their skin, clawing at their eyes, howling at things only they could see. They tried to explain, but their words made no sense. Fractured sentences, unfinished thoughts, gasping out names of people who had never existed. Then, as if something reached into their minds and silenced them, they stopped. Their hearts didn't fail. Their bodies remained intact. They just stopped. The world was unraveling, collapsing without a single shot fired. The last emergency summit was held in an undisclosed location. Its coordinates erased minutes after transmission. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Those inside never left the room. No one was safe. Not the wealthy in their high-security towers. Not the poor huddled in blacked-out streets. Not the doctors, not the soldiers, not the ones who thought they could outrun it. And in the middle of it all, one man was being hunted. Not for money, not for politics, for answers. Dr. Kieran Hale, neuroscientist, former military researcher, exiled from every institution that once praised him. The last man to work on the Dreamstate initiative before it was buried. He knew the truth. He knew what was coming. And he knew that sleep was no longer a refuge. It was a battlefield. A whisper carried through the static, through the dying signals of a world on the brink. You dream, you die. Dr. Kieran Hale had disappeared months ago, erased his records, burned every trace of his past. If the world still believed in ghosts, he would have been one. But ghosts don't bleed. Ghosts don't wake up gasping for air, fists clenched, skin drenched in cold sweat. Ghosts don't feel the walls closing in on them every time their eyes start to shut. He was no ghost. He was a man waiting to be found. 100 feet beneath an abandoned industrial complex, Hale sat in a room that had never officially existed. It was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that brought peace, the kind that made the body tense, the kind that stretched seconds into something unbearable. The only sound was the slow, methodical hum of machines. On the screens before him, real-time data pulsed and flickered, feeding him information he already knew, but couldn't stop staring at. Red indicators. Unstable readings. Patterns forming where they shouldn't. Outside, the world was unraveling. Nations had stopped issuing threats because there was no one left to answer them. Governments functioned in scattered fragments, leaders disappearing faster than their replacements could be sworn in. Cities stood still, not out of peace, but out of fear. It wasn't a war in the way people had always imagined. There were no battle cries. No soldiers running across fields, no smoke filling the sky. This war was silent. It moved in shadows and signals, through neurons and unconscious thoughts. It wasn't fought on land, sea, or air. It was fought in dreams. And it had started long before anyone realized it. Hale's fingers hovered over the keyboard, every keystroke a second closer to something irreversible. He wasn't alone in this. He had once been part of the team that built it. The program designed to weaponize the last untouched frontier of the human mind. Lucid warfare units. A concept buried beneath layers of deniability. An elite force trained to enter dreams, manipulate perception, distort reality itself. A battlefield that left no trace, no bodies, no evidence, just an absence where a person used to be. The perfect weapon. Until it wasn't. The moment the first soldier failed to wake up, the project should have been shut down. When the second's heart stopped mid-mission, alarms should have sounded across every classified corridor. Instead, the world's superpowers went deeper. Because if one country abandoned the technology, another would claim it. If one nation refused to step into the dream war, their enemies would. So they trained their best operatives, turned them into something no human was meant to be, aware inside the subconscious of another, able to shape thoughts, manipulate fears, bury commands, so deep a man would wake up believing they were his own. At first, it worked. Wars were won before they began. Conflicts disappeared before they reached headlines. Targets fell without a single bullet fired. Then something changed. The soldiers stopped returning. Not all at once. It was gradual. At first, they came back different. The memories they brought weren't their own. They spoke of places they had never been, whispered names that didn't exist, sketched symbols that sent classified teams into panic silence. And then, one by one, they vanished. They weren't killed in the field. They weren't captured. They simply closed their eyes and never woke up. The symptoms spread fast. At first, only among the dream operatives, then their handlers, then the researchers studying them. The war had turned on itself, and no one knew why. That's when they called him. Hale had worked on dream mechanics for years, but even he had never seen anything like this. Soldiers weren't just dying, they were being erased. And something was leaving messages behind. Not words, not sounds, images, patterns carved into the subconscious. Visions that every infected person shared, no matter their background, no matter where they had served. A place that didn't exist. A presence they couldn't describe. Then the deaths accelerated. By the time Hale pieced together what was happening, it was already too late. They had created something they couldn't control. A sleeper virus. No biological agent. No digital code. It spread through thought, through dream connections. It had no name at first, just fear in the eyes of those who understood it. Now, the remaining survivors called it Somnoblade. Not a disease. Not an infection. A weapon that turned sleep into execution. And it was learning. Hale exhaled, eyes locked on the monitor in front of him. The data wasn't stopping. The pattern was evolving. Every second he sat there, he was a second closer to being found. Because Somnoblade wasn't just waiting for its next victim. It was looking for him. They found him at 3:17 a.m. Not through tracking signals. Not through intercepted messages. Not through any traditional means of detection. They found him because something inside his mind betrayed him. Hale had spent months burying himself beneath layers of firewalls, neural dampeners, backdoor scramblers. He erased his presence from every network that once knew his name. None of it mattered. Because the war wasn't fought with satellites or surveillance drones. It was fought in sleep. The moment his exhaustion caught up to him, the moment his body finally gave in, he felt it. A pressure, weightless but suffocating. A silence that wasn't empty, but full. And then nothing. He woke to restraints biting into his wrists, metal cuffs cold against his skin. The room smelled of sterilized air, the kind found in facilities designed to keep secrets, not people. Hale didn't ask where he was. It didn't matter. The International Dream Intelligence Bureau had been watching the war unravel from the beginning, waiting for the moment desperation outweighed morality. They weren't government. They weren't private sector. They were something in between, a force that existed only in the spaces where rules didn't apply. And now they needed him. Not to study, not to interrogate, to stop something no one else could. They had already lost their best operatives, entire teams collapsing in their sleep, never waking up. The ones who did return, if they could even be called that, weren't the same. They spoke in fractured memories, repeated sentences that never ended. Some sat motionless for days, staring at walls as if waiting for something to finish loading. Others screamed until their vocal cords tore apart. And then there were the ones who didn't speak at all. Those were the worst. Their eyes still moved. Their bodies still breathed. But they weren't alive. Whatever had come back in their place didn't belong here. Hale had seen the classified footage. A soldier restrained to a hospital bed. Pupils dilated beyond recognition. Lips barely moving. No one could understand what he was saying at first. Then they slowed the audio, played it backward, and they realized he was speaking in his own voice. But it wasn't him. It was something else, speaking through him, using his words. Something that had learned to wear the human mind like a suit. Hale had spent his life studying the edges of consciousness. He understood the way the brain processed reality, how dreams functioned as an open system, how neural patterns could be disrupted, hijacked, rewritten. But this wasn't a theory anymore. This was something real. Something inside the dreamscape had stopped being just thoughts and signals. It had learned to consume, and now it was spreading. The IDIB didn't bother with long explanations. They couldn't afford to. They put Hale under immediately. A forced dream state induction. A neural injection, so strong it bypassed the body's natural defenses, sending him straight into the battlefield without time to resist. No countdown. No preparation. Just the plunge. And then, the shift. Hale's body was gone. The room was gone. He was somewhere else. A city, empty. Buildings stood tall, intact, untouched by time. But there was no wind. No hum of electricity. No distant murmur of life. Only stillness. Then he felt it. A presence, standing behind him. He didn't turn. He didn't need to. She had been waiting for him. Nadira Varys. A name whispered in intelligence circles. Always spoken as if she had never truly been real. She had been the first. The first to master lucid warfare. The first to walk into another's dream and reshape it at will. The first to disappear completely, fading into the dream world with no trace of her ever returning. Some said she was dead. Others believed she had gone too deep, lost in a place where waking up wasn't possible anymore. They were all wrong. She was here, and she wasn't alone. Hale's pulse pounded. The rules of reality were thin here, stretched like fragile glass. He was standing, but not on solid ground. The sky bent in ways it shouldn't. Shadows moved, but there was nothing to cast them. He spoke her name. She didn't answer, but he heard her voice. Not through sound, through thought. You shouldn't have come. Hale didn't choose to be here. The IDIB had thrown him in. He told her as much. Then they've already lost. She turned, eyes locked on his. And that's when he saw it. Something flickering beneath her expression. Not fear. Not warning. Something else. Something watching him from inside her. Hale's breath stopped. Because he knew. The virus wasn't just spreading. It was already here. Hale never agreed to the procedure. Consent wasn't part of the discussion. It never had been. When he opened his eyes, the work had already been done. Something cold pressed against the base of his skull, a weight that hadn't been there before. A dull hum vibrated beneath his skin, syncing with the rhythm of his own pulse. The neural anchor was inside him now, a piece of technology buried deep in classified projects, once considered too unstable to use. It wasn't designed to keep him safe. It was designed to keep him inside. Lucid dreamers had one advantage, the ability to recognize when they were no longer awake. But that recognition wasn't enough. Not anymore. The war had changed. The battlegrounds had evolved. Dream operatives had been disappearing mid-mission, not because they were dying, but because they were forgetting they were dreaming at all. The deeper they went, the more their minds accepted the false world as real. Their memories bent, their identities blurred. The longer they stayed inside, the harder it became to find their way back. The anchor was the answer, a failsafe. It fed a constant pulse through his brainstem, a frequency designed to remind him, always relentlessly, that he wasn't truly here. A signal that whispered, "Wake up, wake up, wake up." But that was the problem. The deeper he went, the fainter that whisper became. They didn't give him time to adjust. Training began immediately. He was thrown into shared dream sessions, surrounded by people who barely looked at him, their minds already fractured from too many cycles inside. Seconds stretched into minutes. Minutes stretched into days. It wasn't an illusion. It wasn't a trick of the mind. Time inside was real. 1 second outside the dream state could be an hour inside. 1 hour outside a month. And there was no way to stop it. His body remained in a controlled facility, hooked to machines keeping him alive. But his consciousness, his awareness, was trapped in a place where days blurred into weeks. The first session lasted 5 minutes. He spent 10 days inside. When he woke up, his hands shook. His throat was raw from screaming at things he could no longer remember. They sent him in again. 15 minutes. 30 days inside. When he woke, there were memories that weren't his. Faces he didn't know. People he had laughed with, fought alongside, mourned for. Except they had never existed. Except they had. The dream sessions were different from anything he had studied. They weren't controlled. They weren't predictable. This wasn't a simulation with boundaries. This was something else. Something alive. Walls didn't stay in place. Objects weren't fixed. The rules of space and time twisted, folding in on themselves, shifting when he wasn't looking. And worse, memories leaked through. Not just his own, others. Pieces of lives that had never been his. Moments that belonged to people he had never met. At first, they came in flashes. A woman crying in a hotel hallway, clutching a phone that wouldn't stop ringing. A soldier gripping a rifle, staring at a field littered with bodies, whispering a prayer to no one. A child's laughter in an empty playground, echoing long after the child was gone. Then the flashes became longer. Hale would wake up gasping, not knowing where he was. Because for the first time, he had started to forget. It wasn't until the 7th session that he understood. Somnoblade wasn't just killing people. It was consuming them. It left no bodies, no traces, because it didn't need to. It erased existence itself, swallowing not just the physical, but the memory of a person, their thoughts, their history, their very place in the world. Every infected dreamer who had disappeared, they weren't just gone. They had never been. And someone had created it. Not by accident. Not as a mistake. By design. This was engineered. The question wasn't how. It was who. And why. Hale felt the weight in his skull, the hum of the neural anchor still fighting to keep him aware. But even as it pulsed its constant message, wake up, wake up, wake up, he wasn't sure it would be enough. Because the moment he had that realization, something else became aware of him. The pieces had been falling into place for a long time. Hale just hadn't seen them fast enough. Or maybe, deep down, he had. Maybe some part of him had known from the beginning. But now there was no room left for doubt. The name cut through the fog like a blade. General Roque, head of the Global Dream Offensive. Architect of modern sleep warfare. A man who had spent decades operating in the spaces no one dared acknowledge. To the world, he was a strategist. A decorated war analyst. A leader who had built entire defense infrastructures before most people even understood the wars they were fighting. To those who knew better, he was something else. A force that had shaped conflicts without ever stepping onto a battlefield. A man who had rewritten history while the world was sleeping. And now, he was the one behind Somnoblade. Hale tried to make sense of it. A virus designed to wipe out dream operatives. A weapon that didn't just kill, but erased. Something that stripped away existence itself. What was the endgame? What was Roque trying to achieve? Then Nadira told him. And for the first time since this war began, Hale felt real fear. Roke didn't want to destroy Dream Combat. He wanted to perfect it. He wanted to take the fractured, unstable chaos of the Dream War and shape it into something permanent. A world where reality itself became an open system. No borders. No rules. No waking, no sleeping. A single, collective lucid dream. A war state with no beginning, no end. A place where only those who could master the battlefield of the mind would survive. The rest? They would be rewritten, erased, removed from the fabric of existence, like they had never been there at all. It had already begun. Hale had seen the signs, but hadn't understood them. The missing soldiers. The people who had vanished overnight, leaving behind no trace, not just in the physical world, but in the memories of those who had once known them. The changes in history. The records that no longer matched. It wasn't a flaw. It wasn't a malfunction. It was the plan. Roke wasn't erasing people at random. He was testing the limits of the dream construct, breaking apart the old world, piece by piece, replacing it with something else. Hale's thoughts raced. He tried to ground himself, to separate the nightmare from the logic, but nothing felt certain anymore. Because if Roke succeeded, then nothing would be real. The world as people understood it, solid, unchanging, bound by time and memory, would become something else entirely. A construct. A system controlled by those who knew how to shape it. It would be war, yes, but one that never ended. Because reality itself would be the battlefield. Hale's pulse pounded. His body, still trapped in the dream state, felt weightless and fragile. His mind fought against the information, rejecting it, trying to find another explanation. But there wasn't one. Nadira's voice pressed against the edges of his consciousness. There's something worse, Hale. He didn't want to ask, didn't want to know, but she told him anyway. Roke wasn't just building a world of endless war. He wasn't just rewriting reality to fit his vision. He was doing it because he believed, truly, absolutely believed, that it was the only way to stop something worse. Something outside the dream world. Something waiting. Hale's breath slowed. His mind tried to push against the weight of it. Roke wasn't just forcing the world into an endless battlefield. He was building a cage. A barrier between humanity and something no one had words for. Something that had already started to push through. And now Hale had to make a choice. If they stopped Roke, if they dismantled the dream offensive, if they destroyed the infrastructure that had been set in motion, then they also destroyed the only thing keeping whatever was on the other side from breaking through. Was this war the nightmare? Or was the nightmare what came after it? The neural anchor pulsed at the base of his skull. Wake up, wake up, wake up. But even if he did, what would be left to wake up to? The realization came slow, like water seeping through a crack, spreading before it could be stopped. Nadira was never real. She had been with him from the moment he entered the dream war. She had guided him through the shifting landscapes, through the waking nightmares, through the layers of a war that had no battlefield. She had given him answers. She had given him purpose. But she had never existed. Hale didn't want to believe it. He forced himself to remember, tried to recall where he had first met her, how she had first appeared. The memories unraveled as soon as he touched them. Not like something forgotten, like something that had never been there in the first place. Her voice, her presence. It had all been constructed, not by accident, not by his own mind. It had been placed there, planted, a piece of something designed to guide him exactly where they wanted him to go. He had never been uncovering the truth. He had been following a script, one carefully written, one he had never questioned. Until now, his body felt distant, his breath shallow. The neural anchor pulsed at the base of his skull, a weak signal struggling to remind him of something that no longer made sense. Wake up, wake up, wake up. But he couldn't trust it anymore. Because if Nadira was never real, then that meant everything she had told him, everything she had made him believe, had been someone else's words. The pieces fell into place too fast, colliding with each other, shattering everything he thought he knew. And then, the whisper. Not hers. Not his own thoughts. Another voice. Calm. Certain. A voice that had been waiting. You never woke up. Hale's pulse stalled. The world around him didn't move, didn't shift, didn't change. Not like dreams were supposed to. It was still. Fixed. The way reality should be. Except it wasn't. Because this wasn't reality. It had never been. His mind had already been hacked. Not today. Not when he first entered the dream offensive. From the very beginning. The war. The escape. The resistance. The desperate fight to uncover the truth. None of it had been real. It had been fed to him moment by moment, line by line, giving him just enough control to believe he had choices. To keep him from realizing the only truth that mattered. He had never left. He had never escaped. He had been dreaming from the start. And Roke had been inside his mind the entire time. Not watching. Shaping. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up. The words in his skull felt empty now, a loop with no meaning. Because there was no waking up. Because there was nowhere to wake up to. And in the silence, Roke whispered again. You've been asleep for a very, very long time. There was no time to think. No time to hesitate. Roke's voice was still inside his mind, threading through every thought, every memory, every decision Hale had ever made. You never woke up. The words echoed, pressing against the edges of his consciousness. A reminder, a warning, a trap. But if this was a dream, if this had all been a construct, then there had to be something beyond it. There had to be a way out. Hale reached for the neural anchor, the last tether keeping him aware, keeping him from slipping into the dream forever. It was fading. The pulse had been steady before, grounding him, reminding him of reality. Now it flickered, weak, unsteady, barely there. Roke was pushing him deeper, forcing him past the thresholds where thought and existence blurred, past the limits of the dream war, past the edges of what the human mind was ever meant to touch. And then, the Omega Realm, the final layer, a realm buried beneath every dream, beneath every unconscious thought, beneath the mind itself. No one had ever reached it. No one had ever returned from it. Because it wasn't just a place. It was the core, the shared consciousness of every dreamer. The foundation on which reality itself had been built. Hale felt himself slipping, his body no longer his own, his memories no longer certain. Soldiers flickered in and out of existence around him, trapped in the endless war. Some were real. Some had never been. They fought in a battlefield that had no ground, no sky, no direction. Time twisted. Seconds stretched into eternities. A bullet fired could take a lifetime to reach its target. Or it could strike before the trigger was ever pulled. There were no rules here. Only willpower. Only control. And Roke had all of it. He stood at the center of the chaos, untouched, unmoved, watching as the war raged around him. Not as a participant, as a god. Because in this place, thought was power. And Roke had shaped every thought, every reality, every dream that had led to this moment. Hale was exactly where he wanted him to be. Wake up, wake up, wake up. The pulse was nearly gone. Hale clenched his fists, forcing himself to focus, to remember who he was, what he was fighting for. But even that was slipping. Because what if Roke was right? What if this war wasn't just destruction? What if it was the only thing keeping something worse at bay? A world of endless war, of shifting realities, of battles that never ended. Or something beyond the dream state. Something waiting. Something that would come through if Roke was no longer there to hold the door shut. Hale could end it. Right now. Destroy the dream state. Collapse the system. Erase every dream soldier, every fragment of this war, including himself. Free humanity from the illusion forever. Or, let Roke win. Let the world stay as it was. A war with no end. A battlefield that had become reality itself. An illusion so deep no one would ever wake up again. Hale's breath slowed. His choice was the last real thing he had left. And he made it. Wake up. Hale made his choice. There was no hesitation. No second-guessing. Wake up. The words weren't just a command anymore. They weren't just a desperate mantra repeating in his head. They were everything. They were the only thing. The battlefield around him was collapsing. The dream state unraveling. Soldiers flickered out of existence, some screaming, some silent, some unaware they had ever existed at all. The war was ending. Roke stood still in the distance, watching, unmoving, unbothered, because he had known all along. Because this moment had always been the inevitable conclusion. Hale clenched his fists, felt his body pulling away from the dream state. The neural anchor surged, its pulse stronger than ever, dragging him back, forcing him through the layers of consciousness. Everything twisted. The world shattered. And then, nothing. Silence. Stillness. A breath. A heartbeat. Hale opened his eyes. The weight of his body settled around him. The air was cold, artificial. The distant hum of machines filled the room. He was awake. He had done it. The dream war was over. Except, something was wrong. He knew this place. The feeling of the restraints. The scent of sterilized air. The pulse of the machines monitoring him. He had been here before. He had woken up here before. Hale's breath stalled. He turned his head. And in the stillness, in the quiet, came the voice. You never woke up. The words slid through the air like a hand closing around his throat. Cold. Certain. Roke. Hale's vision blurred. His pulse pounded against his ribs. No. This wasn't right. This wasn't real. He had made the choice. He had escaped. Hadn't he? Hadn't he? The hum of the machines grew louder. The walls pressed in. The weight of the restraints tightened. Hale tried to move, tried to resist, but his body wasn't his anymore. His mind spun. He searched for something, anything, that could prove he was awake. Something out of place. Something wrong. But there was nothing, because this was where it had always started, where it had always ended. The loop folding in on itself. Hale's lips parted, his breath shallow, his pulse slowing. And then, the last words, soft, almost gentle. Sleep tight. Thank you for watching and sticking with me to the end. Now, if you believe humanity deserves a future among the stars, do subscribe now. Only those who'd abandon Earth to its fate will scroll past.